John McLeese on Bold Radio, experts from 680 CJOB. Sometimes in life, you just need some good advice. No one is an expert at absolutely everything. That's why we're proud to present the Bold Radio Expert Series, where we welcome a qualified and experienced individual to offer sound advice on an aspect of running a business. Our guest today is a highly qualified legal expert. We're very pleased to be joined by Peter Ward, associate at the Winnipeg law firm Taylor McCaffrey LLP. Peter will bring his expertise today on the subject of resolving a tax dispute with the Canadian Revenue Agency. Each of us works hard to make a living, own a home, and earn a paycheck. And the agreement is each of those comes with tax obligations. But what if we feel like those obligations are, let's say, incorrect? Then what? Well, we'll find out how we dispute those with Peter Ward. Welcome to the program, Peter.
Thanks, John.
It's great to have you. First of all, what is a tax dispute?
In the case of income taxes, it's usually any time that the Canada Revenue Agency believes that your income was greater than the income which you pay taxes on.
And how are they going about determining that based on the slips and the information that you've provided?
Often, yes. Sometimes just other things about your tax return will trigger an audit. We don't necessarily know all the ways that a taxpayer does get audited, but usually the first notice that you have that your income tax returns are being looked at is you'll get a letter from CRA asking for certain information. Usually they're looking for documents, things like receipts, invoices, anything to support your tax return. But sometimes, they're just looking for an explanation. So after the taxpayer provides this information to CRA, if they're satisfied, that's the end of the matter. If they're not, they'll issue the taxpayer with something called a notice of reassessment. And this notice of reassessment is significant two ways. First, it's a formal claim for a certain amount of money. And the next is it sets out the deadlines for when the taxpayer has to respond to that formal claim. And usually when a taxpayer gets a notice of reassessment, it's a good idea to get some professional advice at that point. The taxpayer has to take some certain formal steps in order to proceed with a legal dispute. If they don't take those steps, the dispute doesn't get legally resolved. Instead, they end up paying the amount that the CRA has claimed.
So you can, one of two things, if you're an individual or if you're a company and you've got a dispute that has come forward by way of this notice from Canada Revenue Agency, you can decide to pay the amount, or you can get some advice, like someone like yourself, a professional, Taylor McCaffrey LLP, and you can dispute it. So what's the process of dispute?
There's a series of technical steps that you have to take. It starts with filing a notice of objection, and then you're really getting down into arguing about the specifics. And once you've filed those notices of objection, no two tax disputes are really the same. You're judging how you're going to proceed based on just what the nature of that particular dispute is.
And how long can these disputes go on?
Oh, they can go on 5-6 years, or they can be resolved in a matter of just a few months.
Very, very interesting. What are some tips that you might have in dealing with a tax dispute for somebody that's listening?
Yeah. And it's important for the taxpayer to know that it is often possible to reduce the amounts that are claimed by CRA. At Taylor McCaffrey, we've had a lot of success helping people reduce or even eliminate the amounts that they owe CRA. My second tip is that people really should read the mail that they get from CRA carefully. Usually, most people would prefer to ignore letters from CRA or put off dealing with it. This can have serious consequences because a person can lose their right to dispute an amount just by missing a deadline. Also, if the taxpayer is going to get professional advice, it's helpful to give the professional as much time as possible before the deadline. The third thing to know is who has to prove what. We're used to seeing courtroom dramas where the prosecution has to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's true for criminal law. But in a tax dispute, it's up to the taxpayer to show that the CRA is wrong, not the other way around.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. And this means that it's a good idea to give CRA as much documentation to support your position as you can and do it as early as you can. Don't assume that it's up to the CRA to prove its case. It's up to you to prove yours.
And if I'm proving my case, and let's say my case is deemed to be correct in my favor, so in other words, the CRA is wrong, do I have any recourse?
Usually your recourse is that they'll remove the amounts from the assessment. They'll issue you another assessment that replaces the previous one. So replacing it with a correct assessment. That's usually the extent of your recourse.
So just to summarize again, if you want and you get something from the CRA, read it. Make sure you understand what they're sending you, because it could be something very important relative to a tax dispute.
That's right. So it's important to know that you can appeal your assessment or reassessment. You put your best case forward and don't miss your deadlines. And the fourth tip I have is to think about getting experienced professional help. From what we've talked about already, you can probably tell that tax law is a very specialized and technical area of law. If the amount of money at stake in a tax dispute's enough, it may make sense to have a professional deal with all of the steps of it for you. But if the amount at stake doesn't justify that kind of involvement, it may still make sense to get some help at certain steps along the way. And then the taxpayer may be able to do some of the work themselves.
If you are in a dispute with CRA and you need some advice, you want to go to a professional like Peter Ward of the Winnipeg law firm Taylor McCaffrey LLP on our expert segment, Bold Radio.